Okay, recently I talked about something yesterday that was thinking about, and it has to do with the conditions of third world countries and why they're so poor. Now, we could say that half of the problem is this people themselves, who basically the governments they make up policies in which oftentimes are detrimental to the people that live there, and also the corruption as well. That because a lot of the politicians they get the money and they spend it on frivolous items and frivolous things, never really putting the money back into not just the government but to make up programs that help the people. But we also have to think about these two banks, the World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, because these two make up policies and they write up how countries should be traded, should do trade, and which countries to do trade with. Now I'm thinking most developing countries, even though they export a whole lot of some things, never really exporting concrete things that will bring them millions of dollars into their economies. You see, because I remember reading this article years ago about doing about the comparisons between Ghana and South Korea. Now, South Korea and Ghana were in the same boat, but then years later, for some reason, South Korea worked itself up to first world prosperity. So, I mean, look at all the electronics they're making and all the cars they're manufacturing. It does not say Ghana doesn't produce cars, but Ghana, they don't export a whole lot of concrete things. We don't even make any electronic equipment. That tells you the status of how the country is doing. And compare that to South Korea, they formed some companies. They are exporting a whole lot of electronic stuff, and also they're manufacturing cars and exporting them. So just tell you something right there, how South Korea made up the first world status. But I'm thinking from the article, they must have gotten some funding from the U.S. government, because I remember Kwame Nkrumah tried to ask for funding from the U.S. government, and unfortunately was turned away by, I think, maybe the Kennedy or Johnson administration. But no, not those guys. They came out in the 60s, but I think it was another administration that turned him away, and that's what caused him to be so poor. Because you see, if you look at it this way, most most of these Western powers, people in Western societies, they don't want any black or brown people to prosper. I mean, let's look at Latin America, like Brazil and Colombia and all these other countries. They just don't want them to prosper at all because they see it as some sort of threat to their political stance or social economical stance. And even the likes of Southeast East Asia too. Let's not let's forget about Asia for a minute because not just South Korea that's advanced. Look at Japan and in some cases China, but mostly South Korea and Japan because both nations build cars and they make a lot of electronic equipment and export it to other countries. So they're first they made it up to first world prosperity. Now I just had this thought that if Ghana was in the same boat, family members wouldn't be calling for money, calling us for money. That's just how it is, you see. And that tells me the conditions that they're in, financial, economic conditions that Ghana and most developing countries are in. Because I bet people from, say, Brazil like say Colombia or Ecuador, they probably call their family members that are living in Europe, US, and Canada for money as well. So developing countries are not really getting much, not really prospering economically. And I think I made a video about the IMF and the World Bank. Those two are to blame for most developing countries in Asia, Africa, and South America, and Latin America mostly, for being in poverty. The part of the problem are the people, but God blame these big banks. That's my rant for now.